In the misty coastal village of St. Mary's Cove, a retired sea captain is found drowned in his private pool, locked behind an iron gate. Was it an accident or murder? Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of secrets: a nervous widow, a loyal first mate, a secretive cook, and a detached navigator. Whispers of smuggling, a scuff mark by the pool, and a trail of tobacco lead to a chilling truth. Betrayal runs deeper than the sea. Can Miss Marple expose the killer before the tide washes the clues away? Chapter 1. The Sea's Shadow. The morning mist clung to the cliffs of St. Mary's Cove like a widow's veil, softening the jagged edges of the coastline where the sea churned restlessly below. The village, a cluster of whitewashed cottages and winding lanes, seemed to hold its breath as news spread from Cliff House, the imposing manor perched above the shore. Captain Josiah Hargreaves, a man whose name carried the weight of 100 voyagers, had been found dead in his private swimming pool, his body floating in the still, chlorinated water like a ship abandoned at sea. The discovery sent a shiver through the community, for the captain was no ordinary man. He was a legend, a tyrant of the waves who had retired to land but never shed the salt from his soul. Miss Jane Marple, who had arrived in St. Mary's Cove only days before to spend a quiet fortnight with her old friend Mrs. Dolly Bantry, found herself drawn into the affair almost by accident. The two women were taking tea in Mrs. Bantry's cosy sitting room at Seaview Cottage, the windows open to the briny air, when the local constable, a young man named Polk, knocked hesitantly at the door. His face was flushed, his uniform slightly askew, as if the weight of the news had disordered him entirely. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he stammered, twisting his cap in his hands. "It's Captain Hargreaves, ma'am. He's dead, and the inspector thought, knowing your reputation, Miss Marple, that you might lend a thought or two, quiet like." Mrs. Bantry's eyebrows shot up, her cup pausing midway to her lips. "Dead, Josiah. Hargreaves. Good heavens, the man was built like an oak. What happened, Polk?" "Drowned, ma'am," Polk replied, his voice dropping. "In his own pool, up at Cliff House, found this morning by the gardener. No sign of a struggle, they say, but it's peculiar all the same." Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, sharp despite the soft lines of her face, flickered with interest. She set her knitting up. Delicate lace shone on the table and leaned forward slightly, her posture as unassuming as ever. "Peculiar, you say, Constable? In what way?" Polk shifted uncomfortably. "Well, miss, the pool's walled off, private-like, with a locked gate. Only the household had access, and the captain swam alone every morning, regular as a ship's bell. No one saw nothing, or so they claim." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers absently smoothing the skein of wool beside her. "A man does not drown in his own pool without reason," she said softly, almost to herself. "There is purpose in such a death, and purpose leaves a trail, however faint." Mrs. Bantry, ever eager for a mystery, clapped her hands. "Jane, you must look into it. A drowning at Cliff House, why, it's straight out of one of those novels Arthur reads. You'll have it sorted by supper, I wager." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, though her mind was already turning over the constable's words. "I shall do no such thing, Dolly," she said mildly. "But I might take a stroll to Cliff House to offer condolences. It would be the neighbourly thing to do." The walk to Cliff House was short but steep, the path winding past gorse bushes and weathered stone walls. The manor itself loomed at the cliff's edge, its grey stone facade as stern as the captain himself. The pool, an extravagant addition built during Hargreaves' retirement, lay behind high walls, hidden from prying eyes. As Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry approached, they were met by Inspector Craddock, a lean, thoughtful man who had crossed paths with Miss Marple before and held her in cautious respect. "Miss Marple," he greeted, tipping his hat. "I trust, Constable. Poke has filled you in. It's a queer business, and I'd value your thoughts, if you're willing." "Only what is proper, Inspector," Miss Marple replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Tell me, what do we know of the captain's last hours?" Craddock led them to the garden, where the pool's iron gate stood ajar, guarded by a solemn constable. "Hargreaves was last seen last night, dining with his household," he explained. "His wife Ellen says he retired early, complaining of a headache. This morning, at 6, the gardener found him in the pool. The water was calm, no signs of a fight. The coroner's looking at him now, but it seems he drowned, though how a man like Hargreaves, who swam in gales, could drown in 10 feet of water is beyond me." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the gate, its lock gleaming in the pale sunlight. "And this gate?" she asked. "It was locked when the body was found." "Bolted tight," Craddock confirmed. "The keys kept in the captain's study, accessible to the household his wife. The first mate, the cook, and the navigator. No one else." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes tracing the path from the gate to the pool's edge, where the tiles glistened with morning dew. She stepped closer, her sensible shoes tapping lightly on the stone, and paused. There, near the pool's lip, was a faint marker smudge, almost invisible, as if something had grazed the tile. She did not remark on it, but filed it away, like a stitch in a pattern yet to emerge. "The household," she said, turning to Craddock. "They are all still here, I presume." "Aye," he replied, shocked, or so they seem. "Ellen Hargreaves is in the drawing-room, pale as a ghost. Thomas Rourke, the first mate, is pacing the grounds like a caged bear. Mrs. Phipps, the cook, is keeping busy in the kitchen, and Lionel Vance, the navigator, is holed up in the study, calm as you please." Mrs. Bantry, unable to contain herself, whispered a queer lot, "Jane. I've heard talk at the Women's Institute. Rourke's loyal but rough, and Ellen's far too young for a man like Hargreaves. As for Vance, he's an odd fish, always scribbling in his notebooks." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was alight. "People are not so different, Dolly, whether in St. Mary Mead or St. Mary's Cove," she said. "They carry their secrets, and secrets have a way of surfacing, like driftwood after a storm." As they entered Cliff House to offer their condolences, Miss Marple's eyes took in every detail: the polished oak panelling, the nautical charts framed on the walls, the faint scent of pipe tobacco lingering in the air. The household greeted them with varying degrees of warmth, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere, already weaving the threads of a mystery that, like the sea itself, hid its depths beneath a deceptively calm surface. Chapter 2. The crew of Cliff House. The sun had barely crested the cliffs of St. Mary's Cove when Miss Jane Marple, accompanied by Mrs. Dolly Bantry, made her way back to Cliff House the following morning. The air was sharp with salt, and the gulls wheeled overhead, their cries mingling with the distant crash of waves. Miss Marple, her black lace mittens tucked neatly into her handbag, carried her knitting a pale pink cardigan, this time as a shield of sorts, its gentle clicking a counterpoint to the restless energy of a house in mourning. Mrs. Bantry, ever the enthusiast for drama, chatted about the villagers' shock at Captain Hargreaves' death, But Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere, sifting through the fragments of the previous day's visit, like a collector examining shells on the shore. Cliff House, with its stern stone walls and tall narrow windows, seemed to crouch against the cliff's edge, as if guarding secrets from the sea below. The two women were admitted by a maid, a nervous girl with red-rimmed eyes, who led them to the drawing room where the household had gathered, ostensibly to receive condolences. The room was a study in contrasts. Heavy oak furniture, polished to a gleam, stood alongside delicate porcelain figurines, and a massive oil painting of a storm-tossed ship dominated one wall, its dark hues echoing the captain's tempestuous life. A fire crackled in the hearth, though the warmth did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that hung in the air. Ellen Hargreaves, the captain's widow, sat near the window, her slight frame draped in a black silk dress that seemed to swallow her. She was young, no more than 30, Miss Marple judged, with auburn hair pinned loosely and eyes that darted like minnows, never settling. Her beauty was fragile, like a cameo carved too thinly, and her hands, clasped in her lap, bore the faintest tremor when Mrs. Bantry offered sympathies. "It's so kind of you to come," Ellen said, her voice soft but strained, as if each word were a pebble dropped into a still pond. Josiah would have appreciated it. Miss Marple, settling into her backed chair, noted the widow's choice of words, formal, almost rehearsed. "It is a great loss to the village," she said gently, her needles clicking as she began a row. "The captain was a man of such presence. You must feel his absence keenly." Ellen's lips parted, but no sound came at first. She glanced toward the door, as if expecting rescue, then said, "He was a private man, Miss Marple. His world was the sea, and I was only a small part of it." The admission, though quiet, carried a weight that made Mrs. Bantry's eyes widen. But Miss Marple merely nodded, her expression as placid as a summer meadow. The drawing-room door swung open, and Thomas Rourke, the first mate, strode in, his heavy boots muffled by the thick rug. He was a man built for storms, broad-shouldered, with a face carved by wind and sun, his dark hair streaked with grey at the temples. His eyes, a piercing blue, scanned the room before settling on the visitors. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff but polite. "Good of you to call. The captain would have liked that." There was a pause, a flicker of something weariness, perhaps in his gaze, before he added, "It's a bad business, this. A man like him, gone in his own pool." Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a moment. "Indeed, Mr. Rourke," she said, "it is most unexpected. I understand you were close to the captain, having sailed with him for so many years." Rourke's jaw tightened, and he crossed his arms, the sleeves of his woolen sweater straining against his forearms. 20 years, near enough. He was my captain, and a better one you'd not find. Saved my life once, off the Cape, when the mast snapped in a gale. I'd have followed him anywhere." His words were fervent, almost defiant, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers flexed, as if gripping an invisible rope. Before she could probe further, Mrs. Agnes Phipps, the cook, bustled in, carrying a tray of tea and biscuits. She was a stout woman, her face flushed from the kitchen's heat, with greying hair tucked under a starched cap. Her apron was spotless, a testament to her pride in her work. But her eyes were sharp, darting from Rourke to Ellen with a knowing glint. "Here's something to warm you," she said, setting the tray down with a clatter. "No sense moping on empty stomachs. The captain always said a good cuppa set the world right." Mrs. Bantry, ever susceptible to hospitality, reached "For a biscuit, you're a treasure, Mrs. Phipps," she said. "Cliff House is lucky to have you." Mrs. Phipps snorted, though her cheeks pinked with pleasure. "Lucky or not, I've been here 10 years, and I'll not be turned out now." The captain was particular. Mine liked his meals just so, but he was fair in his way. She hesitated, then added, "Shame, what happened? Him being so strong and all." Miss Marple, pouring tea with a steady hand, seized the opening. He was in good health, then. No ailments that might explain such a tragedy. Mrs. Phipps pursed her lips, as if weighing her words. He'd been a bit off, lately headaches, dizzy spells. Said it was the land life, not suiting him. But he swam every morning, rain or shine, never missed a day. Her tone was matter-of-fact, but Miss Marple caught the fleeting glance she cast at Rourke, who had turned to stare out the window. The final member of the household, Lionel Vance, entered quietly, almost unnoticed, his presence as unobtrusive as a shadow. The navigator was a lean man in his late 40s, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed spectacles that magnified his pale grey eyes. He carried a leather-bound notebook, his fingers stained faintly with ink, and his tweed jacket hung loosely on his frame, as if he were more accustomed to charts than company. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he said, his voice precise, like a metronome. "I regret we meet under such circumstances." Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes studying him over the rim of her teacup. "Mr. Vance, you were the captain's navigator, I believe. A role that requires great precision, does it not?" Vance adjusted his spectacles, a small, deliberate gesture. "Indeed, my task was to chart the course, to ensure we reached our destination, no matter the weather." The captain valued accuracy. His words were clipped, offering nothing beyond the necessary, and Miss Marple noted the way his fingers tightened on his notebook, as if it were a shield. The room settled into an uneasy silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant cry of a gull. Miss Marple, her knitting resumed, let her gaze drift from one face to another, cataloguing their expressions as carefully as a botanist might classify leaves. Ellen's fragility, Rourke's guarded intensity, Mrs. Phipps's bustling competence. Vance's detached cameech was a piece of the puzzle, though the picture remained elusive. She sensed currents beneath the surface, unspoken alliances and resentments that swirled like eddies in a tide pool. Mrs. Bantry, less attuned to subtlety, broke the silence. "It's so strange, isn't it? A man like Captain Hargreaves drowning. In his own pool, I mean. He sailed through hurricanes, didn't he? Surely he could manage a swim." Ellen flinched, her teacup rattling in its saucer. Rourke's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing, but it was Mrs. Phipps who spoke, her voice sharp. "Accidents happen, Mrs. Bantry, even to the best of men. The pool's deep, and if he took ill—" She trailed off, her hands smoothing her apron. Vance cleared his throat. "The captain had been under strain," he said, his tone measured. "Retirement did not sit well with him. He missed the sea, the command. It affected his temper at times." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, a soft metronome in the tense air. "Strain can indeed cloud the mind," she said. "Did he share his burdens with any of you? A man of his stature must have relied on his crew, even on land." The question hung in the air, and Miss Marple watched the ripple it caused. Lips parted, but she closed them again, her eyes dropping to her lap. Rourke shifted his weight, his boots creaking on the floor. "He leaned on me for business matters," he said gruffly. "The estate, investments, that sort of thing. But he kept his own counsel, mostly. Mrs. Phipps nodded, though her expression was guarded. He'd talk sometimes, over his supper. Said the village was too small for him, too quiet. Missed the open water. She hesitated, then added, but he never spoke of trouble, not to me. Vance remained silent, his fingers tracing the edge of his notebook. Miss Marple, sensing his reticence, turned to him. And you, Mr. Vance? Did the captain confide in you, perhaps about his plans or worries? Vance's eyes met hers, cool and unreadable. My role was to assist with navigation, Miss Marple, not to pry into his thoughts. He valued my work, and I respected his privacy. The words were polite, but there was a finality to them, a door gently but firmly closed. Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. Of course, privacy is a treasure, especially in a house so full of history. Her tone was light, but her mind was busy, noting the way each answer skirted the edges of truth, like ships avoiding shoals. She sipped her tea, letting the conversation drift to village matters. Mrs. Bantry's fought while her thoughts turned inward, piecing together the fragments of what she had seen and heard. The drawing room, for all its elegance, was a microcosm of tension. Ellen's delicate hands trembling when Rourke spoke. Rourke's restless energy, as if he longed to escape. The room's confines. Mrs. Phipps' quick glances, betraying a knowledge she did not share. Vance's studied detachment, a mask that hid more than it revealed. Miss Marple, who had seen such patterns in the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead, knew that beneath the surface of every household lay currents of ambition, fear, and loyalty, waiting to be charted. As the visit drew to a close, Miss Marple rose, her knitting tucked neatly into her bag. We must not intrude further, she said, her voice warm with sincerity. But if there is anything we can do, Mrs. Hargreaves, please, do call on us. Ellen nodded, her smile faint but grateful. Rourke escorted them to the door, his manner courteous but strained, and Miss Marple caught the faintest whiff of tobacco on his coat, a sharp, acrid scent that stirred a memory from her visit to the pool. Mrs. Phipps and Vance remained behind, their voices low as the door closed. Outside, the wind had picked up, tugging at Miss Marple's hat as she and Mrs. Bantry descended the path. Well, Jane, Mrs. Bantry said, her eyes bright with excitement, what did you make of them? A rum lot, if you ask me. That Rourke looks like he could wrestle a shark, and poor Ellen seems ready to faint at a loud noise. Miss Marple adjusted, her hat, her expression serene. They are a crew, Dolly, bound by the captain's will, but each with their own compass. There is much they do not say, and what is unsaid is often the key. She paused, her gaze drifting to the sea, where the horizon blurred into mist. This house is like a ship, you see, and every ship has its secret cargo hidden below decks, or a course charted in the dark. Mrs. Bantry laughed, though her laughter held a nervous edge. You make it sound positively sinister, Jane. Do you think one of them? She trailed off, unwilling to voice the word. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. I think, Dolly, that Captain Hargreaves did not drown by chance, and where there is purpose, there is a hand to guide it. She said no more, but as they walked back to Seaview Cottage, her mind was already at work, unravelling the threads of Cliff House's tangled crew, each one a knot in a mystery that would not rest until the tide of truth came in. Chapter 3. The Locked Gate. The morning following her visit to Cliff House, Miss Jane Marple sat in the small, rose-scented parlour of Seaview Cottage, her knitting needles moving with their usual quiet rhythm. The pale pink cardigan had grown by a few rows, its soft loops a contrast to the sharp edges of the mystery occupying her mind. Mrs. Bantry, bustling about with a tray of scones and a fresh pot of tea, was in high spirits, her imagination alight with theories about Captain Hargreaves' death. "It's like something from a penny dreadful, Jane," she said, setting the tray down with a flourish. "A sea captain drowned in his own pool. I shouldn't wonder if there's a pirate's curse behind it." Miss Marple's lips twitched in a faint smile, but her eyes remained thoughtful, fixed on the window where the cliffs of St. Mary's Cove rose against a sky heavy with clouds. "Curses are rarely so tidy, Dolly," she said, "but a locked gate, now that is a puzzle. Worth considering. It suggests a boundary, a secret kept close. And secrets, like weeds, have a way of breaking through." Mrs. Bantry paused, a scone halfway to her mouth. "The gate, you mean? The one to the pool?" But Inspector Craddock said it was locked tight when they found the captain. "Precisely," Miss Marple replied, her needles pausing as she met her friend's gaze. "And a locked gate is only as secure as the trust placed in those who hold its key." "I should like to see it again, if the inspector is amenable." As if summoned by her words, a knock at the door announced Inspector Craddock himself, his lean frame slightly stooped from the weight of a sleepless night. His face, usually composed, bore the faint strain of a man grappling with an uncooperative case. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he greeted, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not intruding. I thought you might like to know the coroner's preliminary findings. If you're willing, Miss Marple, I'd value your thoughts at Cliff House, the pool in particular." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained demure. "I am at your disposal, Inspector. And the coroner's report, what does it tell us?" Craddock settled into a chair, accepting a cup of tea with a nod of thanks. "Drowning, as we suspected. No water in the lungs, which suggests he was unconscious or dead before he went under. No marks of violence, no bruises, no cuts. The captain had a history of dizziness, noted by his doctor a month ago, but nothing severe enough to explain this. The odd thing is the absence of anything out of place. No signs of a struggle, no footprints, nothing amiss around the pool." Miss Marple's needles resumed a soft clicking. "And the gate, Inspector, you mentioned it was locked. Was the key in its usual place?" Craddock nodded. "In the captain's study, hanging on a hook by the desk. Anyone in the household could have taken it. Tellen, Hargreaves, Rourke, Mrs. Phipps, Vance. We dusted for prints, but it's a muddle to many hands, and the captain's own were prominent, as you'd expect." Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her eyes wide. "But if the gate was locked, and the key was inside, doesn't that mean it was someone in the house? An outsider couldn't have got in, could they?" Craddock hesitated, his fingers tapping the arm of the chair. "That's the sticking point, Mrs. Bantry. The walls are high, topped with broken glass. The gardener swears the grounds were empty at dawn, and the maid says no one called at the house that morning. It points to the household, but without evidence of foul play, we're treading lightly." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "Then let us tread together, Inspector. A closer look at the pool may clarify. Matters, small things, you know, often speak louder than grand gestures." The walk to Cliff House was brisk, the wind carrying a tang of seaweed and the promise of rain. Craddock led the way, his stride purposeful, while Miss Marple followed at a measured pace, her umbrella serving as both cane and prop. "Mrs. Bantry, bundled in a bright scarf, chattered about the village's growing unease whispers of bad luck, of a captain who defied the sea only to be claimed by his own pool. Miss Marple listened, but her attention was on the path ahead, where Cliff House's grey bulk loomed like a ship run aground at the manor. The iron gate to the pool stood as Craddock had described, heavy, unyielding, its lock gleaming with recent polish. The pool itself lay beyond, a rectangle of still water framed by smooth tiles, its surface reflecting the brooding sky. The high walls, ivy-clad in places, gave the space an air of seclusion, almost secrecy. A single constable stood guard, his notebook open but unused, and he stepped aside as Craddock approached. Miss Marple paused at the gate, her eyes tracing its contours, the sturdy hinges, the absence of rust, the faint scratches around the lock, as if the key had been fumbled in haste. "A fine piece of craftsmanship," she remarked, her tone conversational. "And kept in excellent condition, I see. The captain valued order, did he not?" Craddock nodded, unlocking the gate with a key provided by the household. He did. Rourke saw to the maintenance, soiled the hinges, checked the lock, said the captain insisted on it, like running a tight ship. The gate swung open with a low creak, and Miss Marple stepped through, her sensible shoes tapping on the stone path. The pool's edge was pristine, the tiles scrubbed clean, but she moved, slowly, her gaze sweeping the ground. She stopped near the deep end, where the water lapped gently, and crouched with surprising agility for a woman of her years. There, on a tile just beyond the pool's lip, was the mark she had noticed the day before, faint scuff, no wider than a thumb, its edges irregular, as if something had been dragged or pressed with force. She did not touch it, but her eyes lingered, committing its shape to memory. "Inspector," she said, straightening, "have your men examined this mark? It is slight, but curious." Craddock joined her, squinting at the tile. "Missed that. I'm afraid. Could be anything, a shoe, a tool, even the gardener's rake. But I'll have it photographed and tested. You think it's significant?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "Everything is significant until proven otherwise, Inspector. A mark like this, in a place so carefully tended, suggests a moment of carelessness or necessity." Mrs. Bantry, hovering nearby, peered over their shoulders. "It's awfully small, Jane. Do you think it's a clue? Like in one of those detective stories?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but she did not reply directly. Instead, she turned her attention to the pool itself, noting its depth in feet at the deep end, shallowing to 4 at the other, and the absence of any ladder or steps. A man of the captain's strength would have climbed out easily, she mused aloud, unless he was unable to try. Dizziness, perhaps, or something more deliberate. Craddock frowned, his notebook open now. "You're thinking foul play, Miss Marple. The coroner's report doesn't rule it out, but without marks on the body, it's hard to argue. If someone held him under, you'd expect signs of a struggle, scratches, bruising." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Quite so. But there are ways to subdue a man without leaving a mark, Inspector. A moment's surprise, a hand applied just so, or perhaps a substance taken unknowingly that dulled his senses." She said no more, but her words hung in the air, a quiet challenge to the apparent simplicity of the scene. They circled the pool, Miss Marple pausing now and then to examine the tiles, the walls, the narrow drain at the pool's edge. She noted the faint smell of chlorine, undercut by something earthier, moss, perhaps, or the damp stone of the walls. The gate, when closed, sealed the space completely, its lock engaging with a solid click. She asked Craddock to open and close it again, watching the mechanism closely, her mind turning over the possibilities. A key is a small thing, she said, almost to herself, but it binds a household together or tears it apart. As they prepared to leave, Miss Marple lingered at the gate, her umbrella tapping the ground. "Inspector, might I ask about the captain's routine?" Mrs. Phipps mentioned he swam at dawn, but was he alone, always? Craddock consulted his notes. According to the household, yes. Ellen said he preferred solitude, called it his morning watch. Rourke confirmed it. Said the captain liked to clear his head before the day began. Mrs. Phipps and Vance both backed that up. No one admitted to being near the pool that morning. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her face remained placid. And yet someone was here, Inspector, to lock the gate after the captain entered, unless he locked it himself, which seems unlikely, given his state. She let the thought trail off, her gaze drifting to the scuff mark, now marked by a small chalk circle at Craddock's instruction. Mrs. Bantry, shivering in the rising wind, tugged her scarf tighter. It's eerie, Jane, thinking of him out here alone, with the gate locked behind him, almost as if someone wanted to trap him. Miss Marple patted her friend's arm. Not trapped, perhaps, Dolly, but insured. Privacy can be a weapon in the wrong hands. She turned to Craddock, her voice gentle but firm. I should like to speak with the household again, Inspector, if it can be arranged. There are questions that only they can answer. Craddock nodded, his respect for her growing. I'll set it up for tomorrow, and I'll have that mark analyzed, dust, fibers, anything it might hold. You've a sharp eye, Miss Marple. As they left Cliff House, the clouds broke, sending a light drizzle over the cliffs. Miss Marple opened her umbrella, her thoughts as intricate as the lace she knitted. The locked gate, the scuff mark, the captain's solitary routine, they were threads in a tapestry, each one leading to the next. In her mind's eye, she saw the pool not as a place of leisure, but as a stage, carefully set for a performance no one was meant to witness. And somewhere, in the silences of Cliff House, lay the hand that had drawn the curtain. Chapter 4. Whispers of the seether drizzle of the previous day had given way to a brisk, salt-laden wind that swept through St. Mary's Cove, rattling the shutters of its cottages and stirring the sea into a restless froth. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the weather, ventured into the village after lunch, her sturdy umbrella tucked under one arm and a basket of knitting supplies in the other. Mrs. Bantry, claiming a touch of rheumatism from the damp, had opted to remain at Seaview Cottage, but not without extracting a promise from Miss Marple to share every detail of her findings. "You're up to something, Jane," she had said, wagging a finger. "I can see it in your eyes. Don't leave me in suspense." Miss Marple's destination was the Anchor's Rest, the village pub that served as the heart of local gossip, where fishermen, shopkeepers, and maids gathered to exchange tales over pints of ale and plates of fried cod. She had learned, in her many years of observing human nature, that the truest stories often surfaced not in drawing rooms, but in places like this, where tongues were loosened by camaraderie and the clink of glasses. The pub, a low-beamed building with walls adorned by nautical relics, rusted anchors, faded maps, a ship's wheel above the bar, hummed with subdued chatter as she entered, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and malt. The landlord, a jovial man named Ted Granger with a beard like a bramble bush, greeted her warmly. Miss Marple, a rare sight, You are come to sample my wife's fish pie, or is it the captain's business brings you?" His tone was light, but his eyes held a keen interest, and Miss Marple noted the way the room quieted, heads turning subtly in her direction. "A little of both, perhaps, Mr. Granger," she replied, her voice soft but carrying. "I thought a ginger ale and a warm corner might suit me nicely, and if there's news to share, I'm always glad to listen." She settled at a small table near the fire, her knitting a pair of mittens now, in soft grey woolly, merging from her basket as if by habit. The click of her needles blended with the pub's murmur, a gentle invitation to conversation. Granger brought her drink, lingering as he wiped the table. "Sad business, the captain," he said, lowering his voice. "Folks are saying it's queer, him drowning like that. A man who sailed through typhoons, gone in his own pool. Some reckon it's the sea's revenge." He chuckled, but the sound was uneasy, and Miss Marple caught the glance he cast toward a group of fishermen at the bar. She sipped her ginger ale, her eyes bright with interest. "The sea does inspire stories, doesn't it? Captain Hargreaves was a man of legend, I understand. Did he often come here to share in the villagers' talk?" Granger shook his head. "Not him. Miss kept to Cliff House, mostly, since he retired. Sent Rourke down for supplies or business, but the captain wasn't one for idle chat. Mind, he was respected, paid his debts prompt, gave work to the lads at the docks. But there's them as say his money came from more than honest trade." He leaned closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Smuggling, they reckon, silks, spirits, maybe worse, back in his sailing days." Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a moment. "Smuggling," she repeated, her tone one of mild surprise, as if the idea were novel. "A serious charge, Mr. Granger. Is there truth too?" "It, do you think?" The landlord shrugged, straightening. "Who's to say? Rumours, mostly. But Rourke's been seen at the docks, late at night, meeting boats that don't log with the harbour master, and the captain's cellar folks say it's got more than wine in it." He moved off to serve another customer, leaving Miss Marple to her thoughts, her needles resuming their steady rhythm. The pub's chatter grew livelier as the afternoon wore on, and Miss Marple, ever the unobtrusive observer, listened as fragments of conversation drifted her way. A fisherman with a weathered face spoke of the captain's temper, how he'd once berated a crewman to tears over a mislaid rope. A maid from a neighbouring house pitied Ellen Hargreaves. Poor lamb, married to a man old enough to be her father, and him so cold. Another voice, sharp with resentment, muttered about Mrs. Phipps, the cook, who'd been sacked years ago for stealing provisions, only to be rehired under mysterious circumstances. Lionel Vance, the navigator, drew fewer comments, though a doctor remarked on his solitary walks along the cliffs, always scribbling in that book of his, like he's mapping the stars. Miss Marple sipped her drink, her mind sorting these tidbits as carefully as she might arrange stitches in a pattern. The rumours of smuggling intrigued her most, for they suggested a motive beyond personal grievance, a secret worth killing too. Protect, she recalled Rourke's guarded demeanour, the way his eyes had flickered when questioned about the captain's affairs, and the cellar, mentioned by Granger, echoed Mrs. Phipps's cryptic remark about boxers moved at night. The sea, it seemed, was not just a backdrop to this mystery, but a player in it, its whispers carrying truths the land could not conceal. A new voice broke her reverie, a young woman, a shop girl by her apron, speaking to a friend at a nearby table. "I saw Rourke myself, 2 nights back, down by the jetty. He was with a man I didn't know, all cloaked up, handing over a crate. Looked shifty, if you ask me. Her friend gasped, leaning in, and Miss Marple made a mental note. Her expression as serene as if she were admiring the fire's glow. The door of the Anchor's Rest swung open, admitting a gust of wind and a familiar figure, Thomas Rourke himself. The room stilled briefly, conversations faltering, but Rourke seemed oblivious, his broad frame filling the doorway as he scanned the crowd. His eyes landed on Miss Marple, and for a moment she thought he might approach, but he turned instead to the bar, ordering a pint with a curt nod. The pub resumed its hum, though the air felt taut, like a sail stretched against a storm. Miss Marple watched Rourke from the corner of her eye, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand gripped the glass as if anchoring himself. He spoke briefly to Granger, their words inaudible, then took his drink to a corner, sitting alone. The shopgirl's story lingered in Miss Marple's mind, and she wondered what cargo Rourke might have handled under the cover of night cargo the captain had perhaps discovered, or disapproved of. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple gathered her knitting and rose, leaving a few coins for Granger. She stepped outside, the wind tugging at her hat, and paused to adjust it, her eyes scanning the harbour below. The docks were busy, boats bobbing against their moorings, but her thoughts were on Rourke's late-night meetings, on Ellen's trembling hands, on Mrs. Phipps's guarded glances, on Vance's solitary walks. Each was a thread, and the sea, she sensed, was the loom on which they were woven. She made her way back to Seaview Cottage, the village settling into dusk, its lights flickering like stars against the darkening cliffs. Mrs. Bantry was waiting, a fire blazing in the parlour, and she pounced the moment Miss Marple entered. "Well, Jane, what did you find? Don't tell me you've solved it already." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting resuming its familiar rhythm. "Not solved, Dolly, but enlightened. The village is a chorus, you see, and its songs are full of secrets. The captain's wealth, Rourke's dealings, Ellen's isolation, Mrs. Phipps's past, Vance's wanderings, they all point to the sea, to something hidden beneath its surface." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "Smuggling, you mean? Oh, Jane, it's thrilling. Do you think Rourke's mixed up in it? He's got the look of a rogue, if ever I saw one." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her gaze distant. "Perhaps, Dolly, but the sea is a vast place, and its whispers carry far. We must listen carefully, for the truth is there, waiting to be heard." She said no more, but her needles clicked. On each stitch, a step closer to unravelling the mystery of cliff, house, and the captain who had met his end in the shadow of the waves. Chapter 5. The widow's tailed, the morning sun broke through the clouds over St. Mary's Cove, casting a pale golden light across the village and softening the stark lines of Cliff House, which stood sentinel-like above the churning sea. Miss Jane Marple, ever punctual, sat at the breakfast table in Seaview Cottage, her toast and marmalade untouched as she perused a small notebook where she jotted observations in her neat, spidery hand. Mrs. Bantry, opposite her, was in the midst of a lively recounting of a dream involving pirates and buried treasure. But Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere, her thoughts anchored to the invitation that had arrived the previous evening. Ellen Hargreaves, the captain's widow, had asked her to tea at Cliff House that afternoon. "It's most intriguing, Dolly," Miss Marple said, closing her notebook with a gentle snap. "Mrs. Hargreaves seeks me out, and so soon after her husband's death. One wonders if it is grief that prompts her, or something more pressing." Her voice was mild, but her pale blue eyes held a glint of curiosity. like sunlight catching on a distant wave. Mrs. Bantry paused, a piece of toast halfway to her mouth. "You think she's hiding something, Jane?" "Oh, I knew it. That poor girl. So pale and nervous she's. Probably terrified of Rourke. Or maybe she knows about the smuggling." Her imagination, as ever, raced ahead, but Miss Marple merely smiled, her knitting a grey mitten now emerging from her basket as she prepared. For the day, the walk to Cliff House was pleasant, the air crisp and the cliffs alive with the cries of gulls. Miss Marple, her umbrella tapping the path like a metronome, arrived promptly at 3 o'clock, greeted by the same nervous maid who had admitted her before. The drawing room, where Ellen waited, was as imposing as Miss Marple remembered, its nautical relics, a brass telescope, a ship's bell, a faded chart of the Indies, lending it the air of a captain's cabin. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows, and Ellen stood by the window, her black dress stark against the pale light filtering through the panes. "Miss Marple, thank you for coming," Ellen said, her voice soft but steady, though her hands twisted a laced handkerchief with a restlessness that belied her composure. I felt I must speak with someone, and you seem so kind, so understanding." She gestured to a chair, and Miss Marple settled into it, her knitting tucked beside her, her posture attentive but unassuming. "It is no trouble at all." "Mrs. Hargreaves," Miss Marple replied, her tone warm. "A loss such as yours is a heavy burden. If I can offer any comfort, I am glad to do so." She watched Ellen closely, noting the faint lines of strain around her eyes, the way her gaze darted to the door as if expecting an interruption. Ellen sat, her movements delicate, like a bird alighting on a branch. "It's been so dreadful," she began, her voice trembling. "Josiah was not an easy man, but he was my husband, and now he's gone, and I don't know what to think. The police, the questions, it's all so overwhelming." She paused, her handkerchief crumpling in her lap, and Miss Marple waited, her silence an invitation to continue. When Ellen spoke again, her words came in a rush, as if a dam had broken. "We quarrelled, you see, the night before it happened. It was foolish, really. I wanted to go to London, to visit friends, to have a little time away. Josiah didn't understand. He said the sea was my home now, that I belonged here, with him. He was so stern, so unyielding." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, her chin lifting with a flicker of defiance. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her mind was alert, piecing together the implications. "A quarrel can weigh heavily," she said gently, "especially when it is the last memory of someone dear. Did he often speak so, about the sea being your home?" Ellen nodded, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "Always. It was his world, Miss Marple. The ships, the voyages, the men who sailed with him, he lived for it, even after he retired. I tried to be part of it, but I never could. I was an outsider, I suppose." Her voice broke, and she looked away, toward the window where the sea stretched endless and grey dot. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but probing. "And the household, Mr. Rourke, Mrs. Phipps, Mr. Vanstay, were part of that world, were they not? Did they share his devotion to the sea?" Ellen's lips parted, then closed, as if she had caught herself on the edge of a revelation. "They were his crew," she said at last, her tone careful. "Thomas Mr. Rourke was closest to him, managing his affairs, running the estate. Josiah trusted him, perhaps too much." The last words were barely audible, and Miss Marple noted the sudden stillness in Ellen's hands, as if she feared she had said too much. Too much, Miss Marple echoed, her tone one of mild curiosity, as if she were merely clarifying a point. That is an interesting choice of words, my dear. Was there something in Mr. Rourke's duties that troubled your husband? Ellen's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly, her auburn hair catching the firelight. No, I didn't mean that. Only that Josiah relied on him for everything, business, investments, even private matters. Thomas was loyal, always loyal. Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple sensed a thread worth tugging, though she did not press further. Instead, she shifted her approach, her needles clicking softly as she resumed her knitting. The captain's routine, Mrs. Hargreaves. Phipps mentioned he swam each morning at dawn. Was that a habit he kept even after your quarrel? Ellen nodded, her composure returning. Yes, every day, without fail. He called it his discipline, a way to stay strong, like his years at sea. He went alone, always alone. The pool was his sanctuary, he said. She paused, her brow furrowing. That's what makes it so strange, Miss Marple. He was so careful, so capable. How could he drown? Miss Marple's eyes met hers, steady and kind. That is the question, is it not? A strong man, in a familiar place, meeting such an end. It is perplexing. She let the word linger, watching Ellen's reaction a flicker of unease, quickly masked by a sip of tea. The conversation turned to lighter matters, Ellen's plans to remain at Cliff House, the villagers' kindness in sending flowers, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere, sifting through Ellen's words. The quarrel, the captain's insistence on the sea, the hint of over-reliance on Rourke, they were pieces of a mosaic, each one sharp-edged and significant. She recalled the rumors of smuggling from the Anchor's Rest, the whispers of Rourke's nocturnal dealings, and wondered if Ellen's nervousness stemmed from grief, fear, or knowledge she dared not voice. As the visit drew to a close, Ellen rose, her manner more composed but still fragile. "You've been so kind, Miss Marple," she said, her smile tentative. "It helps, talking to someone who listens. I hope you'll come again." "I shall, if you wish it," Miss Marple replied, tucking her knitting into her basket. "And if you remember anything, however small, do share it with Inspector Craddock. The truth has a way of surfacing, like a buoy in a storm." Ellen nodded, but her eyes dropped, and Miss Marple sensed a hesitation, a secret held back. As she left Cliff House, the wind catching at her hat, she replayed the conversation, her thoughts circling the widow's tale. Ellen's youth, her isolation in a house ruled by the captain's past, her veiled unease about Rourke. They suggested a woman caught in a current she could not navigate. Back at Seaview Cottage, Mrs. Bantry was waiting, her curiosity barely contained. "Well, Jane, what did the widow say? Is she heartbroken, or is she plotting something sinister?" She clapped her hands, delighted by the prospect of intrigue. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its gentle rhythm. "She is grieving, Dolly, but there is more to her story than tears. A quarrel, a husband bound to the sea, a first mate trusted perhaps to deeply. These are not mere ripples, but waves that may yet break." Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a quiet determination, as if she saw the horizon of the mystery drawing closer. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her voice a stage whisper. "You think she suspects Rourke, don't you? Oh, Jane, it's positively thrilling. What next?" Miss Marple's smile was faint, her gaze distant. "Next, Dolly, we listen to the others. Every voice in Cliff House has a tale, and together they will sing the truth." She said no more, but her needles clicked on, each stitch a step toward the heart of the captain's death, where the sea's secrets waited to be unveiled. Chapter 6. The first mate's burden. The late afternoon sky over St. Mary's Cove hung heavy with the threat of rain, its grey expanse mirroring the sombre mood that had settled over Cliff House. Miss Jane Marple, undaunted by the gathering clouds, made her way to the manor once more, her umbrella a steadfast companion and her knitting basket swinging lightly at her side. The invitation to tea with Ellen Hargreaves had yielded valuable insights, but Miss Marple's thoughts now turned to Thomas Rourke, the first mate whose loyalty to Captain Hargreaves was as evident as the tension in his weathered frame. Mrs. Bantry, citing a prior engagement with the Women's Institute, had sent her regrets. Leaving Miss Marple to pursue this thread of the mystery alone, a prospect she found rather agreeable, for solitude often sharpened her observations. Cliff House greeted her with its usual austerity, the stone facade unyielding against the wind that whipped up from the sea. The maid, less flustered today but still pale, ushered Miss Marple into the garden, where Rourke was at work, his sleeves rolled up as he pruned a row of rose bushes with a sailor's precision. The garden, sheltered by high walls, was a riot of late summer blooms, but the air held a chill, and Miss Marple tightened her shawl as she approached. "Mr. Rourke," she called softly, her voice carrying just far enough to reach him. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was passing by and thought to offer my condolences again. The captain's loss must weigh heavily on you." Rourke straightened, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. His face, lined by years of sun and salt, was guarded, but he managed a nod. "Kind of you, Miss Marple. It's a hard blow, losing the captain. He was more than a master to me." His blue eyes, sharp as a hawk's, met hers briefly before flicking away, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in his hands, quickly masked as he gripped the pruning shears. She settled onto a nearby bench, her knitting a grey mitten, nearly complete emerging, as if by instinct. "You sailed with him for many years, I understand," she said, her tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "Such a bond is rare, forged in trials most of us can scarcely imagine." Rourke resumed his work, the shears, snipping with measured rhythm. 20 years, near enough," he said, his voice gruff but steady. "Storms, mutinies, wrecks, we saw it all. He pulled me from the sea once, off Gibraltar, when a wave took me over. I owed him my life, and I never forgot it." His words carried a fervor, almost a challenge, as if daring her to question his devotion. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a counterpoint to the wind's low moan. "A debt like that shapes a man," she said. "And you stayed with him, even after he left the sea. That speaks of loyalty, Mr. Rourke, but also of trust. He relied on you, did he not, for matters beyond the estate?" Rourke's shears paused, and he turned to face her, his expression hardening. "I handled what he asked accounts, shipments, the running of this place. He was the captain, I was his mate. That's how it worked." His tone was curt, and Miss Marple sensed a wall rising, but she pressed gently, her voice as soothing. "As a lullaby, of course," she said, her eyes on her knitting. "But a man like Captain Hargreaves, with his wealth and reputation, must have had complex affairs. I've heard whispers in the village, foolish talk, perhaps about goods moving through the docks, late at night. You've heard such rumors, I'm sure." Rourke's jaw tightened, and he drove the shears into the soil, leaning on them as if to steady himself. Village gossip, he said, almost a growl. Folks see a crate and spin tales of smuggling. The captain was a merchant, Miss Marple. His trade was lawful, and I saw to it. If there's talk, it's from idle tongues. His words were defiant, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of unease in his eyes, the way his fingers flexed against the shears handle. She nodded, as if satisfied, though her mind was alight. With connections, the shop girl's story at the Anchor's Rest, Ellen's hint of Rourke's over-trusted role, the cellar's rumoured contents. Idle tongues, indeed, she said, but they do stir curiosity. Tell me, Mr. Rourke, the night before the captain's death, were you here, at Cliff House? I only ask because the household seems so close-knit, like a ship's crew. Rourke's gaze narrowed, but he answered readily enough. I was in my room, reading. The captain dined with us, then retired early. Said he had a headache. I didn't see him after that. His voice was flat, almost rehearsed, and Miss Marple noted the absence of detail, the way his eyes avoided hers, and the morning he died. She pressed, her tone still gentle, as if inquiring about a neighbour's health. You were not near the pool, I suppose, given his habit of swimming alone. Rourke shook his head, his movements stiff. I was up at 6, tending to the stables. The gardener found him, not me. He turned back to the roses, his shears resuming their work, but Miss Marple caught the faint scent of tobacco clinging to his coat, a sharp, acrid note that stirred a memory of the poolside air, distinct from the captain's milder blend. She rose, tucking her knitting into her basket. You've been most helpful, Mr. Rourke. It's a comfort to know the captain had such a steadfast friend. I shan't keep you from your work. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were keen, cataloguing. The tension in his shoulders, the way his hands lingered on the shears, as if reluctant to let go. As she made her way back to the house, intending to take her leave, she paused at the garden's edge, her gaze sweeping the path to the pool. The iron gate was visible in the distance, its lock a small, gleaming sentinel. She thought of the scuff mark on the tile, the locked gate, the key in the study, and Rourke's guarded answers. Loyalty, she knew, could be a heavy anchor, binding a man to duty or dragging him into depths he could not escape. Inside, she encountered Inspector Craddock, who had arrived to question the household further. He greeted her with a nod, his face lined with the strain of a case that refused to yield. Miss Marple, good to see you. I was just about to speak with Rourke. Any insights from your visit? Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her expression serene. Only observations, Inspector. Mr. Rourke is a man of deep loyalty, but loyalty can be a burden, especially when it conflicts with other obligations. I noticed a scent on his coat, tobacco, quite strong. It reminded me of the air near the pool. A small thing, perhaps, but worth noting. Craddock's eyes sharpened, and he jotted a note in his pocketbook. Tobacco, you say? We'll check his brand against the captain's, and that scuff mark you pointed out, tits, being analysed. Early tests show traces of leather, possibly from a boot. You've a knack for this, Miss Marple. She smiled faintly, deflecting the praise. I merely notice what is there, Inspector. But I wonder, might you ask Mr. Rourke about his movements the night before the captain's death? He claims he was reading, but details are often revealing. Craddock nodded, his respect. For her growing, I'll do that, and I'm arranging for the household to be questioned together tomorrow. Would you care to join us? Your presence seems to unsettle them in a useful way. Miss Marple inclined her head. If I can be of service, I shall. But for now, I must return to Mrs. Bantry. She'll be eager for news, and I dare say I owe her a tale or two. She left Cliff House, the wind at her back, her thoughts swirling like the sea below. At Seaview Cottage, Mrs. Bantry was indeed waiting, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Jane, you've been ages. What did Rourke say? Is he the villain, or just a grumpy sailor?" She poured tea, her hands impatient. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its rhythm. "He is a man carrying a weight, Dolly loyalty, yes, but something darker perhaps. His words are careful, his manner guarded, and there is a scent about him that lingers, like a clue left in haste. The sea binds him to the captain, but it may also bind him to secrets we have yet to uncover." Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands. "Delighted. Smuggling, I'll wager. Oh, Jane, it's better than a novel. What's next?" Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window, where the sea churned under a darkening sky. "Next, Dolly, we watch and listen. The truth is like a tide, it ebbs and flows, but it always comes in." Her needles clicked on, each stitch a quiet promise to unravel the burden that had drowned a captain and shadowed his crew. Chapter 7. The cook's confession. The morning air in St. Mary's Cove carried a damp chill, the kind that seeped into the bones and made the promise of a warm hearth all the more inviting. Miss Jane Marple, ever resilient, set out for Cliff House after a light breakfast, her knitting basket tucked under one arm and her umbrella serving as both shield and staff. Against the gusts that swept up from the sea, Mrs. Bantry, still buzzing from the previous evening's recounting of Miss Marple's encounter with Thomas Rourke, had insisted on joining her, her curiosity outweighing her dislike of the weather. "I shan't miss a moment of this, Jane," she declared, wrapping herself in a voluminous coat. "If Rourke's hiding something, I wager the rest of the household is, too." Miss Marple, her thoughts as orderly as the rows of her latest knitting project, a pair of grey mittens, now complete and replaced by a soft blue scar, forward only a mild smile. "A household is like a tapestry, Dolly," she said as they climbed the path to Cliff House. "Each thread contributes to the pattern, but some are knotted beneath, out of sight. We must look closely to find them." Cliff House loomed ahead, its grey stone walls softened by the mist that clung to the cliffs. The maid, now accustomed to Miss Marple's visits, admitted them with a curtsy, her eyes darting nervously as she led them not to the drawing room but to the kitchen, where Mrs. Agnes Phipps, the cook, was at work. The invitation had come unexpectedly, prompted by a note from Ellen Hargreaves suggesting that Mrs. Phipps wished to speak, though the reason remained unclear. Miss Marple, sensing an opportunity, had accepted at once, her intuition whispering that the cook's bustling exterior might conceal a key to the mystery. The kitchen was a cavern of warmth and order, its stone walls lined with copper pots that gleamed like medals. The air was rich with the scent of baking bread and simmering stock, and Mrs. Phipps, a stout figure in a starched apron, stood at a heavy oak table, her hands deftly rolling dough. Her grey hair was tucked under a cap, and her face, flushed from the heat, bore the lines of a woman who had seen more than she cared to tell. She looked up as the visitors entered, her sharp eyes softening with a flicker of relief. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," she said, wiping her hands on a cloth, "you're kind to come. I have a pot of tea ready, and scones fresh from the oven. Sit, do." Miss Marple settled at the table, her knitting basket placed carefully beside her, while Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, reached for a scone with a murmur of delight. "You're a marvel, Mrs. Phipps," she said, spreading clotted cream with enthusiasm. "These are heavenly. Cliff House is lucky to have you." Mrs. Phipps snorted, though her cheeks pinked with pleasure. "Luck's got little to do with it, Mrs. Bantry. I've earned my place 10 years and more, through fire and storm with the captain. He was particular, liked his fish poached just so, his tea strong, but he knew good work when he saw it." She paused, her hands stilling, and Miss Marple caught the shadow that crossed her face, a fleeting crack in her brisk facade. "We were sorry to hear of his passing," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle as she poured tea from the pot Mrs. Phipps had set out. "It must be difficult, losing such a presence. You knew him well, I imagine, cooking for him all these years." Mrs. Phipps nodded, her lips pursing as she busied herself with a tray of biscuits. "Aye, well enough. He was a hard man, but fair in his way. Kept this house like a ship, everything in its place, no nonsense. I respected that." Her tone was firm, but Miss Marple noted the way her fingers tightened on the tray, as if anchoring herself against a swell of memory. Mrs. Bantry, her mouth full of scone, leaned forward. "It's so odd, isn't it? A man like him drowning. In his pool, I mean. He was strong as an ox, wasn't he? Do you think it was an accident, Mrs. Phipps?" The cook's eyes flicked to Mrs. Bantry, then to Miss Marple, and for a moment the kitchen's warmth seemed to falter. "Accident or not, it's a queer thing," she said, her voice low. "He swam every dawn, never missed a day, even when he was poorly. Dizzy spells he had these last weeks, but he'd not let that stop him. Stubborn he was." She hesitated, her hands smoothing her apron, and Miss Marple seized the opening, her needles clicking softly as she began her scarf. "Stubbornness is a trait of strong men," she said, her tone conversational, "but it can make enemies, too. I've heard talk in the village, silly rumours. Perhaps about the captain's business, about goods moving through the docks. You've been here so long, Mrs. Phipps. Did you ever hear such talk?" Mrs. Phipps froze, her hands mid-motion, and Miss Marple saw the calculation in her eyes, the weighing of what to reveal. After a long moment, she set the tray down with a clatter and leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I've heard things, Miss Marple, and seen things, too. I'm no fool, nor deaf. A week back, I heard the captain and Rourke arguing in the study. Voices raised, sharp-like. It was about cargo, that's the word the captain used. Downed customs. He was furious. Said he'd not have his name tied to it. Threatened to go to the authorities." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady on the cook's face. "The authorities," she repeated, her voice soft but probing. "That is serious, indeed. Did you hear more, Mrs. Phipps, or see anything that might explain such a quarrel?" Mrs. Phipps glanced at the door, as if fearing eavesdroppers, then leaned closer still. "There's boxes in the cellar, miss, heavy ones, moved at night. I've seen Rourke and a lad from the docks, shifting them when the house is quiet. I never looked inside, none of my business, but the captain, he knew. He was checking the ledgers, asking questions. I reckon he found something he didn't like." Her voice trembled, not with fear but with the weight of confession, and Miss Marple noted the beads of sweat on her brow. Despite the kitchen's warmth, Mrs. Bantry, her scone forgotten, gasped, "Smuggling. Oh, Jane, I knew it. Rourke's behind it, isn't he? And the captain found out." Miss Marple raised a hand, her gesture gentle but firm. Let us not leap to conclusions, Dolly. Mrs. Phipps, this is most helpful. Have you shared this with Inspector Craddock? Such information could be vital. Mrs. Phipps shook her head, her expression torn. Not yet, miss. I was afraid. My place here, it's all I've got. The captain took me back, you know, after. I was let go years ago for taking a bit of flour, nothing more. If Rourke's mixed up in something, and I speak out, I could lose everything. Her voice broke, and she turned away, busying herself with the dough as if to hide her distress. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind was racing, connecting the cook's words to the rumours at the Anchor's Rest, to Rourke's guarded demeanour, to the scuff mark by the pool. You've done right to tell me, Mrs. Phipps, she said. The truth is like a good broth. As you might sit, needs time to simmer, but it strengthens those who partake. I shall speak to the inspector, and you may trust him to be discreet. Mrs. Phipps nodded, her shoulders sagging with relief, though her eyes remained wary. You're kind, Miss Marple. I only want this house to be at peace again. The captain deserved better than whatever happened. As Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry prepared to leave, the cook pressed a tin of scones into their hands, her gesture a plea for goodwill. For your tea, she said, her voice gruff, and thank you, miss, for listening. Outside, the wind had sharpened, tugging at Miss Marple's hat as they descended the path. Mrs. Bantry, clutching the scone tin, was alight with excitement. Jane, that was extraordinary. Boxes in the cellar, arguments about Cargoets. A proper conspiracy. Do you think Rourke killed the captain to keep his smuggling quiet? Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her expression serene. It is a possibility, Dolly, but possibilities are like pebbles on a beach, many, and not all precious. Mrs. Phipps has given us a thread, but we must weave it carefully. The captain's anger, Rourke's secrecy, the cellar's contents, they point to a motive, but not yet to a hand. She paused, her gaze drifting to the sea, where waves crashed against the cliffs. We must see what the inspector uncovers, and what the others say. At Seaview Cottage, Miss Marple relayed the cook's confession to Inspector Craddock over the telephone, her voice calm but precise. He promised to search the cellar and question Rourke, his tone tinged with gratitude. You've a way of finding what we miss, Miss Marple, he said. I'll keep you informed. As she hung up, Mrs. Bantry pounced, her eyes gleaming. What now, Jane? Are we off to catch a smuggler? Miss Marple settled by the fire, her blue scarf growing under her needles. Now, Dolly, we wait. The truth is stirring, like a pot on the boil. Mrs. Phipps has spoken, but others will, too, and their words will light the way. Her needles clicked on each stitch, a quiet vow to uncover the secrets that had drowned a captain and left a household adrift. Chapter 8. The navigator's compass. The sky over St. Mary's Cove had cleared by mid-morning, the clouds parting to reveal a crisp blue that mirrored the sea's restless surface. Miss Jane Marple, fortified by a simple breakfast of tea and toast, set out once more for Cliff House, her knitting basket swinging lightly, and her umbrella tucked under her arm as a precaution against the capricious coastal weather. Mrs. Bantry, though eager to accompany her, had been waylaid by a pressing matter at the Women's Institute. A fundraiser for the church roofend sent Miss Marple off with a flurry of encouragement. Find out what that Vance fellow's hiding, Jane, she called from the doorstep of Seaview Cottage. He's too quiet for my liking, like a cat watching a mouse. Miss Marple, her thoughts as intricate as the blue scarf growing under Her needles smiled faintly but made no reply. Lionel Vance, the navigator, had intrigued her from their first meeting. His reticence, his precise manners, the way his ink-stained fingers clutched that leather-bound notebook as if it held the map to his soul. In a household of strong personalities, Vance was a shadow, slipping through the cracks of attention, and Miss Marple knew from experience that such shadows often concealed the sharpest truths. Cliff House welcomed her with its familiar sternness, the stone walls absorbing the sunlight rather than reflecting it. The maid, now almost accustomed to Miss Marple's visits, led her through the house to the captain's study, where Vance had been sighted earlier. The study was a shrine to the sea, shelves lined with nautical tomes, a brass sextant gleaming. On the desk, charts of distant waters pinned to the walls. Vance sat at a table by the window, his notebook open before him, a pen scratching steadily across the page. He looked up as Miss Marple entered, his pale grey eyes magnified by wire-rimmed spectacles, and rose with a courtesy that felt practiced but genuine. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice as precise as a clockstick, "an unexpected pleasure. I trust you are well." He gestured to a chair, his movements economical, and Miss Marple settled into it, her knitting basket at her side and her expression one of benign interest. "Quite well, Mr. Vance, thank you," she replied, her needles emerging to begin a new row of the scarf. "I was passing by and thought to see how the household fares. The captain's death has left a void, I imagine, especially for those who sailed with him, like yourself." Vance adjusted his spectacles, a small gesture that Miss Marple noted as a shield, a moment to gather his thoughts. "It has, indeed," he said, his tone measured. Captain Hargreaves was a commanding figure, even in retirement. His loss is keenly felt. He returned to his seat, his fingers resting lightly on the notebook, and Miss Marple sensed a reluctance to elaborate, a door half closed. She let the silence linger, her needles clicking softly, before speaking again. "Your role as navigator must have been vital to him," she said, her voice warm but probing. "Charting courses through storms and uncharted waters, such work requires a steady hand and a clear mind. Did you find the captain relied on you as much on land as at sea?" Vance's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "My duties were confined to the ship, Miss Marple. On land, I assisted with minor tasks, cataloguing his charts, maintaining his instruments. The captain preferred to manage his affairs through Rourke. My role was peripheral." The word was chosen with care, and Miss Marple caught the faint bitterness in it, like a note played off-key. "Peripheral, perhaps, but not insignificant," she said, her eyes on her knitting. "A navigator sees the whole journey, does he? Not the currents, the hazards, the destinations others might overlook. I've heard talk in the village gossip, no doubt about the captain's business, about goods moving through the docks. As a man of observation, Mr. Vance, did you ever notice anything unusual?" Vance's fingers tightened on his notebook, and his gaze flicked to the window, where the sea stretched vast and unreadable. "Village talk is often exaggerated," he said, his voice cool. "The captain was a merchant, his trade well documented. Rourke handled the details. I had no part in it. My concern was with maps, not cargo." His words were firm, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hand, the way his spectacles caught the light as he adjusted them again. She nodded, as if satisfied, though her mind was busy, weaving his reticence into the pattern of the mystery. "Of course," she said. "Maps are a world of their own, are they not? I noticed your notebooks, such meticulous work. Do you record the cliffs here, perhaps, on your walks? I've heard you're often seen along the coast, at dusk. Vance's eyes narrowed, but he answered readily enough. I sketch the landscape. Yes, the cliffs, the tides, they're a study in precision, like navigation. It clears my mind. He opened the notebook, revealing pages of neat drawings, jagged coastlines, tidal patterns, a few cryptic annotations. Miss Marple leaned forward, her interest genuine, though her eyes scanned for more than artistry. Beautifully done, she said, her tone admiring. Such detail requires a keen eye. Tell me, Mr. Vance, the night before the captain's death were you here, in the study, perhaps, working on your sketches? Vance closed the notebook with a deliberate snap. I was in my room, reading, he said, his voice clipped. The captain dined with us, then retired. I saw no one after that until morning. His answer was as precise as his drawings, but Miss Marple sensed a gap, a space where truth might have been trimmed to fit, and the morning itself. She pressed, her voice still gentle, as if inquiring about a neighbour's garden. You were not near the pool, I suppose, given the captain's solitary habit. Vance shook his head, his expression unreadable. I was in the library, reviewing some of the captain's older charts. The gardener's shout brought me out when the body was found. He paused, then added, it was a shock, of course. I assumed an accident as dizziness, perhaps. He'd mentioned it once or twice. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze meeting his. Dizziness, she repeated, her tone thoughtful. Yes, Mrs. Phipps spoke of that, too. It's curious, is it not, that a man so strong could succumb so easily? You've a scientific mind, Mr. Vance. Did you ever suspect anything amiss in the captain's health or his household? Vance's lips thinned, and for a moment she thought he might deflect again, but he leaned forward, his voice low. The captain was under strain, he said. Retirement chafed him. He missed the command, the open water. It made him sharp, especially with Rourke. I overheard them once, a few days before. An argument about business. Rourke was defensive. The captain insistent. I didn't catch the details. He stopped, as if regretting his candour, and Miss Marple noted the way his fingers traced the notebook's edge, a nervous tick. An argument, she said, her voice soft. That is most interesting, Mr. Vance. Did you share this with Inspector Craddock? Vance shook his head, his gaze dropping. It seemed trivial at the time. I prefer to keep out of disputes. The admission was reluctant, and Miss Marple sensed a man torn between loyalty and self-preservation, a navigator charting a course through treacherous waters. She rose, tucking her knitting into her basket. You've been most kind, Mr. Vance. To share your time, your work is a credit to the captain's legacy. If you think of anything more, do tell the inspector. Small details, you know, can light the darkest paths. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were keen, cataloguing his unease. The notebook's cryptic pages, the hint of discord with Rourke. As she left the study, she paused by the sextant on the desk, its brass cool under her fingertips. A navigator steers clear of storms, she said, almost to herself, but he still knows where they lie. Vance did not reply, but she felt his gaze on her as she departed, a weight as tangible as the sea's pull. Outside, the sun had dipped behind a cloud, and Miss Marple walked slowly, her thoughts swirling. Vance's detachment, his cryptic sketches, his admission of the captain's strain, they were pieces of a puzzle, each one edged with possibility. She recalled Mrs. Phipps's confession about the cellar, Rourke's guarded answers, Ellen's trembling hands, and now Vance's hint of an argument. The household was a ship adrift, its crew bound by secrets, and the captain's death the reef on which they had struck, at Seaview Cottage. Mrs. Bantry was waiting, her fundraiser forgotten in her eagerness for news. Jane, what did Vance say? Is he a smuggler, too, or just a bookish bore? She poured tea, her hands impatient. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her scarf growing under her needles. He is a man of precision, Dolly, but precision can mask as much as it reveals. He speaks of arguments, of strain, yet holds back, like a chart with missing coordinates. The sea binds this household, but it also divides them, and Vance sees more than he says. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a quiet resolve, as if the mystery's horizon were drawing near. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her voice a stage whisper. Another argument. Jane, it's a nest of vipers. What next? Miss Marple's smile was faint, her gaze distant. Next, Dolly, we let the inspector's search of the cellar speak. The truth is a compass, and it will point the way. Needles clicked on, each stitch a step toward the heart of Cliff House's secrets, where the captain's death waited to be mapped. Chapter 9. The smugglers thread the afternoon sun cast long shadows over St. Mary's Cove, its golden rays doing little to warm the chill that lingered in the air around Cliff House. Miss Jane Marple, fortified by a quiet lunch at Sea Cottage, prepared for another visit to the manor. Her knitting basket, stocked with the ever-growing blue scarf, and her umbrella, a faithful companion against the unpredictable coastal breeze. Mrs. Bant, though eager to join, had been detained by a sudden summons from the vicar regarding the church roof fundraiser, leaving Miss Marple to face the next unravelling of the mystery alone. Don't let that Rourke bully you, Jane, Mrs. Bantry had called from the doorstep, her voice bright with anticipation. And if there's smuggling afoot, I want every detail. Miss Marple, her thoughts as precise as the stitches in her scarf, smiled but said nothing, her mind already turning over the threads she had gathered. Ellen's nervous hints, Rourke's guarded loyalty, Mrs. Phipps's confession about the cellar, and Vance's cryptic admission of an argument. Each was a knot in the tapestry of Captain Hargreaves' death, and the rumours of smuggling, whispered in the village and now echoed in the cook's tale, suggested a motive as dark as the seas. Depths. She had telephoned Inspector Craddock that morning, urging a search of the cellar, and his promise to act swiftly had set the stage for this visit, where she hoped to observe the household's reactions as the net tightened. Cliff House stood, as stern as ever, its stone walls absorbing the sunlight like a secret hoarded. The maid, her face now a mask of weary resignation, admitted Miss Marple and led her to the drawing-room, where Inspector Craddock was already present, his lean frame tense with purpose. The household had been summoned, Dellen Hargreaves, Thomas, Rourke, Mrs. Phipps, and Lionel Van Sand. The air crackled with unease, like a ship's deck before a storm. Miss Marple settled into her backed chair, her knitting emerging as a shield of normalcy, her pale blue eyes scanning the room with quiet acuity. Ellen sat by the window, her black dress a stark contrast to her pale skin, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Rourke stood near the fireplace, his broad shoulders squared, his face a mask of defiance tempered by wariness. Mrs. Phipps hovered near the tea tray, her apron pristine but her eyes darting nervously, while Vance, ever the shadow, sat at a small table, his notebook closed but his fingers tracing its edge as if seeking comfort. Craddock, standing at the room's center, cleared his throat, his voice calm but authoritative. "Thank you for gathering," he began, his notebook open in his hand. "We've made progress in the investigation into Captain Hargreaves' death, and I've asked Miss Marple to join us, given her insight into such matters." He nodded to her, and Miss Marple inclined her head, her needles clicking softly, a gentle counterpoint to the tension. Craddock continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "Following a tip, we searched the cellar this morning. We found crates, several dozen containing silks, brandy, and tobacco, none of which appear in the captain's ledgers. These goods are unmarked, suggesting they were brought in without customs knowledge. In short, we're looking at smuggling." His words landed like a stone in still water, and Miss Marple watched the ripples spread. Ellen's hands tightened, her knuckles whitening, but her face remained composed, a fragile mask. Rourke's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing, though he said nothing, his silence as heavy as an anchor. Mrs. Phipps let out a small gasp, quickly muffled, her hands smoothing her apron as if to erase her own words. Vance's expression did not change, but his fingers stilled on the notebook, a subtle tell that Miss Marple noted with interest. Craddock turned to Rourke, his voice steady. "Mr. Rourke, you manage the captain's business affairs. Can you explain these crates?" "The captain's ledgers, which Miss Marple kindly suggested we examine, show no record of such goods." Rourke's gaze flicked to Miss Marple, a flash of resentment quickly masked. "The captain authorized those goods," he said, his voice gruff but controlled. "He dealt in trade, always had. Those crates were part of his stock private dealings, not for the ledgers. He trusted me to handle them." His words were firm, but Miss Marple caught the slight tremor in his hands, the way his boots shifted on the rug. Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Private dealings, you say, yet the captain's own notes, found in a locked drawer, mention irregularities. In his accounts, and a meeting with you, Mr. Rourke, to discuss them, he wrote of betrayal and exposure. Care to explain that?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Ellen's head snapped up, her eyes wide, while Mrs. Phipps stared. At the floor, her lips pressed tight. Vance's gaze remained fixed on his notebook, but his stillness was that of a man bracing for impact. Rourke's face darkened, his hands balling into fists. "That's nonsense," he said, his voice rising. "The captain was tired, unwell. He saw shadows where there were none. I was loyal to 20 years. I served him. I'd not betray him, not for anything." Miss Marple's needles paused, her voice soft but cutting through the tension. "Loyalty is a noble thing, Mr. Rourke, but it can blind a man to his own actions. The captain was a meticulous man, was he not? If he suspected deceit, he would have acted. Did he confront you, perhaps, in the days before his death?" Rourke's eyes locked on hers, a storm brewing in their depths, but he shook his head. "He said nothing to me. If he had suspicions, he kept them close. I did my duty, nothing more." His words were defiant, but Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his brow, the way his gaze darted to Ellen, who looked away. Craddock stepped forward, his tone firm. "We're testing the crates for fingerprints, and will be speaking to the dock workers. If these goods are tied to illegal trade, someone will answer for it, and if the captain's death is linked—" He let the implication hang, his eyes scanning the room. Mrs. Phipps, unable to bear the silence, spoke, her voice trembling. "I told Miss Marple about the boxes, Inspector. I heard the captain and Rourke arguing about cargo, customs. I didn't want trouble, but I couldn't keep silent. Her confession, though already known to Miss Marple, seemed to strike Rourke like a blow. His face, pulling Ellen's voice, soft but clear, broke the tension. Josiah was worried, she said, her eyes fixed on her hands. He mentioned discrepancies. A few nights before it happened. He said he'd handle it, but he was angry. I didn't know what it meant. Her admission, though vague, added weight to the inspector's findings. And Miss Marple noted the way Rourke's shoulders stiffened, as if bracing for a wave. Vance, silent until now, cleared his throat. The captain was under strain. He said, his voice precise. Retirement weighed on him. It's possible he misunderstood the accounts. Mistakes happen. His words were neutral, but Miss Marple sensed a deflection, a navigator steering clear of dangerous shoals. Craddock nodded, closing his notebook. We'll continue our inquiries. No one is to leave Cliff House without my permission. Miss Marple. A word, he gestured toward the hall, and she followed, her knitting tucked away, her expression serene but alert. In the corridor, Craddock lowered his voice. You were right about the cellar, Miss Marple. Those crates are damning, and Rourke's story doesn't hold water. The captain's notes suggest he was about to expose him. Do you think Rourke? He trailed off, his eyes searching hers. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her voice calm. Rourke is a man caught in a net, Inspector, but whether he cast it himself, we cannot yet say. The crates, the argument, the captain's suspicions, they point to a motive, but the pool, the locked gate, the scuff mark, they speak of method. We must find how they connect. She paused, her gaze distant, and we must watch the others. Fear loosens tongues, and secrets surface. Craddock nodded, his respect evident. I'll have Rourke questioned again, and we're checking his boots against that scuff mark. You've a gift, Miss Marple, for seeing what's hidden. She smiled faintly, deflecting the praise. I only see what people show, Inspector, but I shall return tomorrow, if you permit, to hear what else is said. She left Cliff House, the sea's roar in her ears, her thoughts weaving the smuggler's thread into the mystery's fabric at Seaview Cottage. Mrs. Bantry was waiting, her fundraiser forgotten in her eagerness. Jane, smuggling crates. Tell me everything. She poured tea, her hands impatient. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her scarf resuming its growth. The cellar has spoken, Dolly, and its secrets point to Rourke. But the household is a chorus, each voice adding to the song. The captain's suspicions, Rourke's denials, Ellen's fears, Vance's silences, they are threads in a net, and the truth is the fish it will catch. Her needles clicked on, each stitch a vow to trace the smuggler's path to the heart of the captain's death. Chapter 10. The poolside truth. The morning broke over St. Mary's Cove with a deceptive calm, the sea glittering under a pale sun, while the cliffs stood sentinel, their shadows long and sharp. Miss Jane Marple, having breakfasted early at Seaview Cottage, prepared for what she sensed would be a pivotal visit to Cliff House. Her knitting basket, now home to the nearly completed blue scarf, hung from her arm, and her umbrella tapped the floor as she reviewed her notes, her spidery handwriting cataloguing the threads of the mystery, the smuggler's crates, Rourke's defiance, Ellen's fears, Vance's reticence, and Mrs. Phipps's confession. Mrs. Bantry, though eager to join, had been persuaded to stay behind. Her tendency to exclaim at inopportune moments deemed a risk. I'll be waiting with bated breath, Jane, she had declared, pressing a thermos of tea into Miss Marple's hands. Catch that smuggler. Miss Marple, her thoughts as clear as the morning light, smiled but said nothing, her mind fixed on the pool where Captain Hargreaves had met his end. The scuff mark on the tile, the locked gate, the tobacco scent lingering in her memory, they were pieces of a puzzle that, she felt, were nearing alignment. Inspector Craddock had telephoned the previous evening, his voice taut with news. The scuff marks analysis had revealed traces of leather and moss, suggesting a boot, and the tobacco on Rourke's coat matched a sample found near the pool. These clues, combined with the seller's contraband, pointed to a confrontation, but the how and why remained elusive. Miss Marple, ever patient, resolved to revisit the scene, trusting that the poolside would yield its final secrets. Cliff House greeted her with a quiet that felt expectant, as if the manor itself awaited resolution. The maid, her face drawn, admitted Miss Marple and directed her to the garden, where Inspector Craddock was already at work, a constable photographing the pool's perimeter. The iron gate stood open, its lock gleaming in the sunlight, and the pool's still water reflected the sky like a mirror, its serenity at odds with the violence it had concealed. Craddock, his lean frame bent over a notebook, straightened as Miss Marple approached, his eyes bright with a mix of fatigue and determination. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat, "you're just in time. We've got results from the lab, and I'd value your thoughts. That scuff mark, it's leather, likely from a boot, with moss matching the path to the gate, and the tobacco same brand as Rourke's, found in traces by the pool. It's building a case, but it's still circumstantial." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze sweeping the pool's edge, where the chalk circle marked the scuff's location. Circumstantial, perhaps, Inspector, but compelling. A mark, a scent, a locked gate, they are like breadcrumbs, leading us to the truth. May I see the spot again? Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing as she stepped forward, her umbrella tapping the stone path. Craddock led her to the deep end, where the tile bore its faint, irregular scar. Miss Marple crouched, her movements careful, and studied the mark anew. Its shape suggested pressure, a drag rather than a step, as if someone had braced themselves against the tile. She rose, her gaze tracing the path to the gate, then back to the pool's edge, envisioning the captain's final moments. A man of his strength, she mused aloud, would not drown without a struggle, unless he was caught unawares or weakened. Craddock frowned, his notebook open. The coroner found no drugs, no alcohol beyond a trace from dinner. His dizziness was noted, but not severe enough to incapacitate him. If Rourke was here, holding him under, you'd expect marks, bruises, scratches. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her thoughts racing. Not if it was swift, Inspector. A moment's surprise, a hand applied with force, the water doing the rest. The gate, locked behind them, ensured no witnesses. And this mark, she pointed to the tile. It suggests a struggle, however brief. A boot pressed hard as someone steadied themselves. She stepped back, her umbrella tapping as she circled the pool, her mind reconstructing the scene. The captain, weakened by a dizzy spell, swimming at dawn. Rourke, perhaps waiting, the key in his pocket. A confrontation, words exchanged, then a sudden act, the water closing over the captain's head, the tobacco scent, the scuff mark, the locked gate. They painted a picture, but one piece remained, motive, tied to the smuggler's crates and the captain's threat to expose Rourke. Craddock watched her, his respect evident. "You're thinking Rourke, aren't you? The crates, his argument with the captain, now this evidence, it's piling up. We found a boot in his room, moss on the sole, and we're testing it against the mark. If it matches, we've got him. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. It is a strong thread, Inspector, but we must be certain it holds. Rourke's loyalty was fierce, but so was his ambition, I suspect. The captain's discovery of his smuggling, his threat to go to the authorities would have been a blow. A man like Rourke, bound to the sea and its secrets, might act to protect his own course. She paused by the gate, her fingers brushing the lock, its cold metal unyielding. The key, she said, almost to herself. It was in the study, accessible to all, yet only one needed it that morning. Rourke, who maintained the gate, who knew the captain's habits, who carried the scent of tobacco that lingered here. Her voice was soft, but her words carried weight, and Craddock jotted them down, his pen moving swiftly. As they returned to the house, intending to confront Rourke, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the household's reactions. Ellen's fragile silence, Mrs. Phipps's nervous confession, Vance's calculated detachment, they had all pointed to Rourke, yet each held their own secrets, their own reasons to fear exposure. The pool, she realized, was not just a place of death, but a mirror, reflecting the household's hidden currents. In the drawing room, Rourke was waiting, summoned by Craddock's earlier request. His broad frame filled the doorway, his face a mask of defiance, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Ellen, Mrs. Phipps, and Vance were present, their expressions ranging from anxiety to guarded curiosity. Craddock wasted no time, his voice firm. "Mr. Rourke, we found evidence linking you to the pool the morning of the captain's death. Tobacco traces, a boot with moss matching the path, and a scuff mark that may tie to you. Care to explain? Your movements, the dawn..." Rourke's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists. "I told you, I was at the stables. I didn't go near the pool. You're grasping at straws, Inspector." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple noted the sweat on his brow, the way his gaze darted to the door. She stepped forward, her voice gentle but piercing. "Mr. Rourke, the captain trusted you, but he also suspected you. His notes, his argument with you, the crates in the cellar, they tell a story of betrayal. Did he confront you that morning, by the pool? Did he threaten to end your dealings? To expose you?" Rourke's eyes locked on hers, a storm raging within them, but he shook his head. "I never touched him. He was my captain, my friend. I'd not harm him, not for anything." His words were fervent, but Miss Marple saw the crack in his resolve, the weight of guilt pressing down. Craddock pressed further, detailing the boot's discovery, the tobacco's match, and the captain's ledgers, which showed discrepancies. Rourke could not explain. The room grew taut, Ellen's hands trembling, Mrs. Phipps staring at the floor, Vance's gaze fixed on his notebook. Miss Marple, her knitting idle now, watched them all, her mind weaving the final threads. As prepared to take Rourke for formal questioning, Miss Marple spoke, her voice soft but clear. "The pool tells its truth, Mr. Rourke. The mark, the scent, the gate, they are witnesses, silent but sure. If you have more to say, now is the time." Her words, though gentle, carried a quiet authority, and for a moment Rourke's defiance faltered, his shoulders sagging. Back at Seaview Cottage, Miss Marple relayed the day's events to Mrs. Bantry, who listened with wide-eyed fascination. "Jane, you've all but caught him. A boot, tobaccowitz like a detective novel. Is Rourke the murderer?" Miss Marple settled by the fire, her scarf resuming its growth. The evidence points to him, Dolly, but the heart of the matter why? He acted how he planned lies in the shadows still. The pool has spoken, but the sea holds the final word. Her needles clicked on, each stitch a vow to see the mystery through, as the truth of the captain's death drew ever closer. Chapter 11. The confrontation. The wind howled over St. Mary's Cove that evening, rattling the windows of Cliff House and stirring the sea into a frenzy of white-capped waves. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the gathering storm, sat in the drawing room of the manor, her knitting basket at her side and her blue scarf nearing completion under her deft needles. The air was thick with tension, as if the house itself sensed the climax of the mystery unfolding within its walls. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist the lure of drama, had joined her this time, her eyes bright with anticipation despite the late hour. "It's like the final act of a play, Jane," she whispered, clutching her shawl. "Rourke's cornered, isn't he? Oh, I can't wait to see how this ends." Miss Marple, her thoughts as calm as a sheltered cove, offered a faint smile, but kept her focus on the scene before her. Inspector Craddock had summoned the household Ellen Hargreaves, Thomas Rourke, Mrs. Phipps, and Lionel Vance for a final round of questioning. The evidence from the pool and the cellar now a net tightening around the first mate. The drawing room, with its nautical relics and flickering firelight, felt like a courtroom, each occupant a witness to the truth about to be unveiled. Miss Marple, invited by Craddock for her uncanny insight, sat quietly in a corner, her needles clicking softly, her pale blue eyes missing nothing. Craddock stood at the room's center, his lean frame taut with purpose, a file of notes in his hand. The household sat or stood in varying states of unease. Ellen, pale and fragile, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Rourke, by the fireplace, his broad shoulders rigid, his face a mask of defiance. Mrs. Phipps, near the tea-tray, her apron smoothed, but her eyes darting nervously. Vance, at a small table, his notebook closed, his spectacles catching the fire's glow. The inspector cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the room's heavy silence. "We've gathered evidence that can no longer be ignored," Craddock began, his gaze sweeping the group. "Captain Hargreaves did not drown by accident. The scuff mark by the pool, the tobacco traces, the boot with moss matching the path, they point to a deliberate act. And the crates in the cellar, coupled with the captain's own notes, suggest a motive tied to smuggling. Mr. Rourke, the evidence points to you. It's time to tell the truth." Rourke's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists, but he shook his head, his voice rough. "I've told you, Inspector. I was at the stables that morning. I didn't go near the pool. You've got no proof. I touched him." His words were defiant, but Miss Marple noted the sweat on his brow, the way his eyes flickered toward Ellen, who looked away, her lips trembling. Craddock opened his file, his tone unrelenting. "We've tested the boot from your room, Rourke. The moss matches the path, and the leather traces align with the scuff mark. The tobacco on your coat same brand found by the pool, and the captain's ledgers, which Miss Marple urged us to examine, show discrepancies you can't explain. He wrote of betrayal and a plan to confront you. Did he do that, Rourke? Did he threaten to expose your smuggling?" The room seemed to contract, the fire's crackle the only sound as Rourke's defiance wavered. Ellen let out a small, choked sob, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth, while Mrs. Phipps stared at the floor, her hands clasped tightly. Vance remained still, his gaze fixed on the table. but Miss Marple caught the slight tightening of his fingers. A navigator sensing a shift in the wind. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her voice soft but piercing. Mr. Rourke, the captain, was your friend, your saviour, yet he suspected you. His notes, his argument with you, the crates, they tell a story of trust broken. That morning, by the pool, did he challenge you? Did he demand you stop, or face the authorities? Such a moment, for a man of your loyalty, must have been unbearable. Rourke's eyes locked on hers, a storm raging within them, and for a moment she thought he would hold fast. But then his shoulders sagged, his head bowing as if under a crushing weight. He knew, he said, his voice hoarse, barely audible. He found the crates, checked the ledgers, saw the payments I'd hidden. That night he called me to the study, said he'd turn me in if I didn't stop. I begged him 20 years, I gave him my life, but he wouldn't bend. Said his name, his honor came first. The room froze, Ellen's sob catching in her throat, Mrs. Phipps's hands flying to her mouth. Craddock leaned forward, his voice steady. And the morning he died, Rourke, what happened by the pool? Rourke's gaze dropped to the floor, his voice a broken whisper. I went to him, at dawn, before his swim. I thought I could reason with him, make him see. But he was furious, said he'd already ridden to the customs office. I lost control. He was weak, dizzy, saw my chance. I held him under, just for a moment, till he stopped fighting. The gate was locked, no one saw, I thought. I thought it'd look like an accident. His confession, raw and ragged, filled the room, and Miss Marple felt a pang of sadness, not triumph. At the unravelling of a man's soul, Ellen cried out, a sharp, anguished sound, and buried her face in her hands. Mrs. Phipps, tears streaming, murmured, "Oh, Thomas, what have you done?" Vance remained silent, his face impassive, but his fingers clenched the notebook, a rare crack in his composure. Craddock stepped forward, his voice firm. "Thomas Rourke, you're under arrest for the murder of Captain Josiah Hargreaves. You'll come with me." As the constable moved to restrain Rourke, Miss Marple spoke, her voice gentle but clear. "Mr. Rourke, you carried a heavy burden, loyalty, twisted by greed, fear outweighing friendship. The pool was your stage, but the sea, I think, was your judge." Rourke did not reply, his head bowed as he was led away, his boots heavy on the polished floor. The household dispersed in a daze, Ellen retreating to her room, Mrs. Phipps to the kitchen, Vance to the study, each grappling with the truths. "Wait," Craddock lingered, turning to Miss Marple with a weary nod. "You saw it from the start, didn't you? The scuff mark, the tobacco, the ledgers. Without you, we'd have called it an accident." Miss Marple tucked her knitting into her basket, her expression serene. "I saw only what was there, Inspector Small things, left carelessly, like pebbles on a shore, but they led us to the truth, as they always do." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window, where the sea churned under the storm's lash. Rourke's crime was born of desperation, but it was his own hand that cast the net. Mrs. Bantry, who had listened in rapt silence, could contain herself no longer. "Jane, you're a marvel. A confession, just like that. But how did you?" "No, it was Rourke, right from the pool." Miss Marple smiled, adjusting her shawl. "I didn't know Dolly, not at first. But the mark, the scent, the gait, they spoke of someone close, someone trusted, who knew the captain's habits. Rourke, loyalty was his shield, but his secrets were his chains. The sea, you see, hides much. but it always returns what it takes. As they left Cliff House, the storm breaking overhead, Miss Marple walked slowly, her thoughts settling like silt after a flood. The confrontation had laid bare the heart of the mystery, but the sadness of a life lost, a friendship betrayed, lingered like the sea salt on her lips. At Seaview Cottage, she would recount the day to Mrs. Bantry's eager ears, but for now, she let the wind carry her forward. The truth of the captain's death a beacon in the gathering dark. Chapter 12. The seas silenced the storm that had battered St. Mary's Cove the previous night had passed, leaving a morning of fragile calm, the sea a sheet of glass under a sky bruised with fading clouds. Miss Jane Marple sat at the small table in Seaview Cottage, her knitting a soft blue scarf, now complete, folded neatly beside her, replaced by a new project, a delicate shawl in pale lavender. Her breakfast dishes were cleared, and a pot of tea steamed gently, its aroma mingling with the salt air drifting through the open window. Mrs. Bantry, still aglow from the drama of Rourke's confession, paced the parlour, her voice bubbling with questions. "Jane, it's extraordinary. A murderer caught, a smuggling ring exposed, all because of a scuff mark and some tobacco. But what happens now? Will Cliff House ever be the same?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her expression serene but tinged with a quiet sadness. "Nothing is ever quite the same, Dolly, after such a truth comes to light. But life, like the tide, moves on, carrying the wreckage and leaving the shore clean." Her words were gentle, but her thoughts lingered on Cliff House, where the ripples of Rourke's crimes still stirred the household's fragile peace. The previous evening's confrontation had closed the case of Captain Hargreaves' death, but Miss Marple felt a duty to return to Cliff House one last time, to offer condolences and gauge the household's path forward. Inspector Craddock had telephoned earlier, confirming Rourke's formal charge and the seizure of the smugglers' crates, which had revealed ties to a broader network now under investigation. "Your instincts were Spartan, Miss Marple," he had said, his voice warm with gratitude. "We'd have missed it without you." She had demurred, as always, but agreed to visit the manor that afternoon, sensing that the final threads of the mystery needed tying off. The walk to Cliff House was peaceful, the cliffs bathed in soft light, the gulls' cries a mournful counterpoint to the sea's hush. Miss Marple, her umbrella tapping the path, arrived to find the manor quieter than ever, as if the storm of revelation had drained its vitality. The maid, her eyes red but her manner composed, led her to the drawing-room, where Ellen Hargreaves sat alone, her black dress softened by a shawl of pale grey. The nautical relics charts, sextant ships, bell-seamed relics of a bygone era, their gleam dulled by the weight of recent events. "Miss Marple," Ellen said, rising with a fragile smile, "you've been so kind through all this." I don't know how to thank you." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she gestured to a chair, and Miss Marple settled into it, her knitting basket at her side, her lavender shawl beginning to take shape. "There is no need for thanks, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her tone warm. "You've borne a great deal. I only hope the truth, painful as it is, brings some measure of peace." Her eyes, gentle but keen, studied Ellen's face, noting the shadows under her eyes, the resolve in her set jaw. Ellen nodded, her gaze drifting to the window, where the sea stretched endless and calm. "Peace," she echoed, her voice soft. "I'm not sure I know what that feels like anymore. Josiah's death, Thomas's betrayal, it's as if the house itself is grieving. I've decided to sell Cliff House, to leave St. Mary's Cove. There's nothing for me here now." Her words carried a quiet strength, and Miss Marple sensed a woman stepping out from her husband's shadow, tentative but determined. A wise choice, perhaps, Miss Marple said, her needles clicking rhythmically. A new beginning can heal old wounds. And the others, Mrs. Phipps, Mr. Vanswell, they stay on. Ellen's lips curved in a faint smile. Mrs. Phipps insists on staying until the sale, to keep the kitchen running. She feels responsible, I think, for speaking out. Mr. Vance, he's already packing, planning to return to his studies in London. He says the sea has lost its charm for him. She paused, her hand smoothing her shawl. They're good people, in their way, but this house, this life, it was Josiah's, not theirs. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to the households. Fractured bonds. Mrs. Phipps's confession had been a spark, igniting the truth, while Vance's silence had shielded his own detachment. Rourke's crime, born of greed and fear, had shattered the captain's legacy. But Miss Marple felt no triumph, only a quiet sorrow for the lives tangled in its wake. A house is only as strong as those who dwell in it, she said. You are young Mrs. Hargreaves, and the world is wide. You will find your place. Ellen's eyes met hers, a flicker of gratitude in their depths. I hope so, Miss Marple, and you saw what we could not. How did you know it was Thomas? Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze distant. I saw only what was there. My dear small things, like the scuff mark, the tobacco, the locked gate, they were like ripples on the water, leading to the stone that caused them. Rourke's loyalty was his mask, but his secrets were his undoing. The sea, you see, hides much, but it always returns what it takes. Her voice was soft, but its weight lingered, and Ellen nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. As Miss Marple rose to leave, promising to call again before her departure from St. Mary's Cove, she paused by the ship's bell, its brass dulled. By time the sea keeps its silence, she said, almost to herself, but the shore speaks its truth. Ellen did not reply, but her smile was a quiet acknowledgement, a bridge between their shared understanding. Back at Seaview Cottage, Miss Marple found Mrs. Bantry waiting, her fundraiser forgotten in her eagerness for news. Jane, is it truly over? What of Ellen and the others? Tell me everything. She poured tea, her hands impatient. The thermos from that morning untouched. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her lavender shawl growing under her needles. It is over, Dolly, though the echoes remain. Ellen will leave, seeking a new horizon. Mrs. Phipps stays to tend the embers. Vance retreats to his books. Rourke's crime has broken the house, but it has freed them, too, in its way. The sea has spoken, and its silence now is a mercy. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a quiet wisdom, as if she saw beyond the mystery to the human heart beneath. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her voice a stage whisper. You're a wonder, Jane. To think a murderer caught because of your sharp eyes. What's next? Another mystery in St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple's smile was faint, her gaze drifting to the window, where the sea lay still under the fading light. Next, Dolly, I return home, to my garden and my knitting. But mysteries, like waves, come unbidden. We need only watch for them. She opened her book, a slim volume of poetry, and her needles clicked on, each stitch a quiet farewell to the secrets of Cliff House, where the sea's silence had finally given way to truth, as she prepared for her departure from St. Mary's Cove, the train to St. Mary Mead waiting to carry her back to her quiet life. Miss Marple felt the weight of the case lift like a tide receding. The captain's death, Rourke's betrayal, the household's fractured loyalties, They were a storm now past, leaving the shore clear for those who remained, and in her heart she knew the sea would always whisper new tales, waiting for a listener as patient as she.